Hey folks, welcome to the online book launch of Circe, Goddess of Sorcery. I am Irisanya Moon and I wrote that book. So that's why we're talking about it today. Here it is, and it officially came out December 1st, but it arrived on my doorstep much earlier than that. So I have actually heard from a lot of folks that they got their books early, which is really great. And I've started to hear some feedback around that. So also great. If you want to share any of your feedback with me, I'd love to hear it, or your thoughts or your questions. And also this online launch is also a great place to, if you're here, to ask questions, great. If you're not here and you're watching it later, either on YouTube or on Facebook, please feel free to leave a comment, message me. I'd love to hear what you think, and I'd love to hear what Circe potentially has inspired in you. I think she's very well timed right now. It's always strange because I write books so much earlier than when they come out, and this one especially I wrote back in 2023. And did I know that we would be in this place that we're in right now? I mean, I probably could have guessed, but it just feels a little bit more relevant than I had anticipated. So the goal for today is I'm going to talk a little bit about me, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, each of the chapters, and then I'll have time at the end for any questions if folks have anything, and if not, I'm sure I'm going to talk about something else because there's always a little bit more. Plus, I actually wrote something for another book on Circe, so I'll talk about that at the end because we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. For folks who don't know who I am, I'm Irisanya Moon. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm currently on the land of the Wapo, the Coast Miwok, and Southern Pomo, also known as Santa Rosa, California, USA. I am a Moon Books author, witch, priestess, poet, international teacher, ritualist, initiate in the reclaiming witchcraft tradition, and a bunch of other things. And Circe is my, I think, 9th book for Moon Books since I started writing with them in 2020. So, lucky number 9. And Circe is probably a deity who I've been a little hesitant to work with because of a lot of her reputation and a lot of her, the stories that are told about her. So I was a little hesitant, but also really inspired because she's also been so influential and, I mean, inspirational, especially in the ways I might be able to use my magic for justice. So, or as I put in the book, alchemize my anger into energy for fighting injustice. Hopefully that is what she might offer to you too. One of the things I'd love to start off with is actually not in the book, but I am who I am. So not my first encounter, but one of my first encounters with Circe was actually through Madeline Miller's book, Circe. And if you haven't checked that out yet, you really should. And if you can get it on audio, even better. The person who narrates it does such a great job. But there was a quote that I ran across today when I was creating some marketing for this. And I think it speaks to the way I hold Circe and her power. And the quote is, this is a conversation between Athena and Circe in Madeline Miller's book. And Circe responds to Athena saying, "You do not know what I can do." So let's start there. So the book that I've written has, I think, I'm going to double check real quick to make sure I'm not lying to everybody, but it has 8 chapters in it. Pagan portals are just introduction books, not just, but they are introduction books. So for me at least, they're meant to inspire you to continue on, to learn more about these different deities or practices. And this is a good foundational book, however, with the details you might want to need to know. So starting off, every book I start off with sort of a personal story about how I'm connected to this deity. And one of the things you'll read in this book, if you haven't already, is about the beginning of my witchcraft journey and a particular witch that was in the area that I used to live named Lady Circe. And I'm going to leave that a little mysterious in this moment, but it really was the beginning point of me thinking about the stories that we tell of other people and the stories that we believe, and how it can be very easy to believe a story that you're told over and over instead of finding out the truth, which sort of seems very appropriate in these times. What is true? But with starting out with Circe, I'm just going to read just one little part from the beginning, and that is in chapter 1, Encountering Circe. Circe, there is a sound in the name as it slides across my tongue and teeth. There is an energy that asks me to pay attention, to take notice, and to watch closely. I am asked to remember this is a special type of magic, of sorcery. This magic comes from within, from the deepest levels of the body and heart. Most of the books for deities start off with just getting to step into the energy of that deity. So in the beginning, it's sort of a connection, again, on maybe more of an emotional level, and begins often with a trance that I've written so that you can go encounter that deity. Because if there's anything that I think to be true, is that deities, while books are really informative and you should still buy them, they're just the beginning, and your experience of Circe or any deity is going to be different from mine. And so this beginning part suggests that you step into experiencing her versus coming to any final solutions, beliefs, structures. Again, it's about encountering and seeing what arrives for you. If you're reading this book or you're curious about this book, there's probably a reason, and there's probably something to that you might want to follow. And why not ask the deity? Chapter 2 is about Circe's family and her companions. And I like to talk about that sort of place in the family tree because, especially in Greek mythology, it can get very confusing, and it can be also really informative when you learn where a deity's parentage is, and maybe the different versions of that. Because Circe, in the Odyssey, written by Homer, I'll just read the quote that I have in the book. Circe, a goddess with braided hair, with human speech, and with strange powers. Baleful Aeetes was her brother, and both were radiant Helios, the sun god's children. Their mother was Circe, Oceanus's daughter. So Circe, more often than not, is the sun god's daughter and a nymph's daughter. And so this combination of, light and water. And that is a part of the environment in which folks are living. And so it makes sense that she's also has the great setup for being a very powerful witch and sorceress. But that's not the only parentage that she's associated with. Now, it's not as widely said, but also I know to look for it, so I think it is. Circe might also be Hecate's daughter. And that is something that you see in a lot of different writings. You see in a lot of different stories about Hecate. You'll see Circe brought in there, or stories about Medea, which we'll talk about in a second. So where her parentage is, who knows? But Hecate makes a lot of sense to me. Helios is the parentage that is used in Madeline Miller's book. And there's something about the way they then describe Circe as having these golden eyes, which seems to be something that comes from her dad. And but also this very human voice, because she's not born of two gods. So there's this whole contention bit in Madeline's book, but also I think in a lot of the writings about her. I think that overall learning also like who she interacts with. That's something that can really inform magical workings that you might do with her, and or you might find relational points, which I think is always interesting in terms of how I connect to a deity and how they might connect with me. Just create some familiarity and create some intimacy even before I've done a lot of magical work. But the next thing that I love and grow more and more fond of as I learn about deities or write about deities is chapter 3 is about her stories and myths. And to be clear, I can't include every story that has ever mentioned Circe in it, or Kirka, as she's also referenced. I do want to include stories that really speak to different qualities of the gods because, again, I feel like story is such a great connection point, and it allows us to, or allows me and possibly you, to step into that world where these gods exist and where these gods have made decisions and created change. So the first thing that gets a little murky with Circe is that how, like, there's a lot of images of her being on this island by herself with a whole bunch of animals that may or may not be men that she turned into animals. But how did she get there? There are some stories that say she did something and she was punished and sent to this island, Aea. And there are other stories that said that she went there willingly because she wanted to. And I think in Greek mythology especially, this is something to listen to and to consider as you're reading the different stories, because I think that there's such a consistency among especially female presenting deities being sort of shoved off because of some sort of strange thing that they've done versus telling the story more often that they decided to go do this thing. So for example, I think of Persephone. Did Persephone get, taken into the underworld, or did she go there on purpose? There are stories that say both. So thinking again about Circe and thinking about how she may have arrived at this island with all of her wisdom and all of her talent, but also maybe she was a little bit of a rabble rouser and folks wanted her to go somewhere far away. That doesn't sound like something that would be happening in this world today, right? So Circe lived on an island of Aea, also called the Island of the Dawn, and some stories describe the way she was exiled to the mythical place as being by her father after Circe killed her husband and turned a romantic rival into Scylla, a sea monster. Whole lovely story I outline in the book about that. It's kind of fun and very, very Greek mythology. So sources have also sort of talked about how, again, that Circe went on her own because she didn't feel like she fit in. And there are some stories and some writings about Circe that say she really got mocked a lot for not being like the traditional goddess. Like she had this, like this sort of human voice and the golden eyes, and she just didn't seem like other deities. And I mean, that's a whole thing in Greek mythology of like who's deity enough. And that she just sort of was like, I'm done with you. I'm just going to go do my thing. So in the end, really the story that is right is the one that you probably resonate with, or it's the one that impacts you the most. I think that especially when I'm really impacted by a particular story, there's a reason. And so I think about, for example, with Circe, I might think about, the ways in which I have been put into situations because of my actions, or the ways that I have taken control of situations because I wanted them to look a certain way. And again, this sort of wanting to find connection with deity really comes out of engaging with what we can find about them. I mean, I could probably make an argument that Circe isn't a deity, or she's a demigod, maybe, but in the end, I'm not sure it entirely matters to me. But I wouldn't know any of that, and I wouldn't even think about any of that if I wasn't engaging with the story in some way, shape, or fashion. So there's another story, though, about Circe and going to this island by herself, about her being brought to the island by dragons, which is one I hadn't heard of until I researched this book. And so, but sources, this is in the book, sources also describe how Circe was brought to the island by dragons, not necessarily by force. In other stories, there seems to be a conversation between Aphrodite and Medea, with Aphrodite in disguise as Circe. So the Circe in that conversation just basically talks about how she doesn't like living where she's living with her dad and she wants to find another place. So dragons, punishment, free will, who knows? But I think that all lines up with what at least I think I know about Circe in this moment. Other stories that I absolutely adore with Circe and that I talk about ad nauseum. I did a presentation for the Season of the Witch conference that happens around Samhain every year, and I talked about Circe and necromancy because 'tis the season. One of the most famous stories with Circe in it is a story of her and Odysseus. And for those folks who might not be as placed in that story, Odysseus is the one who goes off on this journey, and it takes 10 years and goes on all these different fantastical adventures, meets all these different creatures, and gets lost a whole bunch of times on the way. And at one point, Odysseus and his men stumble upon Circe's island, and it seems like a good place to stop, which, always turns out well. And they stop, and Circe gets really upset because she's not a big fan of folks joining her space without her permission, and does turn a lot of the men into various animals, pigs, and I can't remember exactly how they're all described, but sort of falls for Odysseus somehow, some way. I mean, on an island by herself, and says, you know what, I will allow you and your men to stay here, for as long as you like. But Odysseus has Circe sort of promise him that when he's ready to leave, that she will help him leave. One of the things that's really striking to me about Circe is that she is a person of their word, a god of their word. They do promise things and they do follow through. At one point, Odysseus is very clear that, I gotta go. I really do want to try to get home. And one of the things that, she realizes as Odysseus is asking her this, and she's going to lose this being that she loves, is that I did promise this. I did say that I would do this. I did say I would help them. And if there's somebody who I love, then I should help them. And also, Circe is very clear in the writing about, I don't want you to stay here because you feel like you have to. I want you to be here because you want to be. So I will help you leave. To me, this is a striking story about her, and it's a striking story about integrity. And if we believe that Circe is on this island because she was out of integrity, we also see this story, which is a contrast to that. Hi, folks. So many folks are joining. Hello, everybody. So what she does, again, one of my favorite stories, so I want to tell a little bit of it, is she tells Odysseus, yes, there is a way to get off this island. There is a way for you to come home. Absolutely, to go home. However, you need to talk to a dead seer. And Odysseus is, kind of taken aback by this, because people who are alive and human don't go to the underworld to talk with different deities. That's not what happens, because once you go to the underworld, you really don't come back. And so he's a little concerned about this, but Circe is very clear, here is what you need to do, here are the steps that you need to take, and I will make sure that you can do this. And she outlines the steps, these steps that are also used in many rituals involving necromancy and calling on spirits and calling on them to offer wisdom, insight, connection. And so she sends Odysseus off with all these instructions, and he does follow them, and eventually he does get back home to his long-suffering wife, Penelope, who has been wondering where the heck he is. And there's a whole bit in the book too about how things are different for different women presenting deities and characters in Greek mythology. I'll just say I have concerns about that, or I have opinions. It is part of the context of that time. So, very successfully does help Odysseus get back. So, way to go, Circe. Circe is also kind of comes across as more of a helper than I think a lot of ways she's portrayed in other parts of mythology or in other books. You know, when Medea and Jason both come to her and say, hey, we need to hide here for a little bit. And she's like, absolutely, great, let me help you out. And then finds out that they've been lying to her. She stops her help at that point. She doesn't do any harm to them, from what I'm remembering in this moment, but she is very clear that you have lied to me and that is not okay with me, so I can't do anything more. So again, like there is this sort of interesting back and forth, at least in my brain, about Circe being sort of chastised and ostracized, but then also being someone who is very clearly willing to help folks who need her help. And especially when she has promised that she would do that, she definitely will. So I think that this is so great because I think that it creates more complexity for gods when we start to look at all these stories and to see, you know, what's been said and what actually happens. Those are not always the same thing, especially when you think about how many translations of the Odyssey there are, how many translations of, you know, theogony that there are. When you look at different translations, those stories are going to be told differently. Different people are going to get emphasis. And that is important when you're looking at building a relationship with a deity and kind of saying, you know, what's important to me in this relationship? What do I bring? What is the benefit to me for working with a particular deity? And you only find that out really by listening to their stories and hopefully looking at a whole bunch of different translations of their stories, because that will give you the most comprehensive look into who this being is, or at least how they're seen to be. And I actually think that's an important point to make right now, is that, you know, one of the things I've said a lot lately is this quote from Mary Oliver in this interview she did once, and it's, attention is the beginning of devotion. And that's important in this moment because I can tell you all of the things that I've learned about Circe and all of the things that I think are important, but where you put your attention is really what will inform your devotion. If you focus on the ways in which she harmed a lot of folks, then that will be part of your devotion. And if you look at all the ways that she had to make really difficult decisions in different situations, that will inform your devotion. Probably a little bit of both. But it's something to think about. You know, learning the stories of God helps to inform and inspire how we relate to them. And so that's why I often say, make sure that you are looking at as many stories as you can and as many interpretations as you can, because these are all alive still because they have had meaning for the folks who've read them. Hi, folks. Hi, Ambry. Hi, Marissa, Ronald, Nomi, and sorry, the other name slid away. Yeah, so again, I mean, I could go on forever about reading the stories of the gods, but read as many as you can. There are a lot of great translations by women translators, and I actually have a pretty comprehensive list of those translations in an upcoming book. But if folks are interested and want to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to hand that out. I thought that the only person who had done translations was a woman who had done translations of ancient Greek source material was Emily Wilson, because she's the only one I'd heard of, and those are the ones that I own. But now I own others because there are plenty more than that, and folks from way earlier, back I think even into the 1700s, there were women translating ancient Greek. So I think that that's important. I think that it informs, especially stories of a deity who is presenting as female. And I keep using that phrase because I don't believe the gods have gender. I think that that's such a human construct. And so I'm going to phrase it in this way. It's awkward, but also I think specific to the way I approach things. There's also another story. I'm not going to go through all the stories I include in the book, but another story does break down and pull apart the story about Scylla and Circe's actions when she finds out that the that Glaucus, this this human that she falls in love with. It's a big part of Madeline Miller's book. When Glaucus actually is like, no, I want to, I want to be with like the most beautiful deity or nymph or whatever. After Circe turns him into a god, and then he's like, I don't really like you. I'm going to go off and find something else. So Circe gets understandably upset and acts accordingly, and creates Scylla, the monster. Again, I think that complexity and sort of competing viewpoints of the gods are really important, not only because it informs devotional work, but also it reminds us that humans are the same way. I think for me, it has created such a great muscle of being able to hold multiple truths at the same time, that a person isn't all good or all bad. I mean, we could probably make some arguments in some directions, but overall, like, I personally don't think that anyone is all good or all bad. And this work that I do with gods, these books that I write, are helping to continuously reinforce that and allow me to expand the way I look at things, the way I look at stories, the way I interact with them, and the way that I question what I think is true or not. And that changes all the time because new information, new opinions, or I've changed as a person and I think about things differently. And I think that's a good thing. So chapter 4, I talk about spell work and Circe, which is, might be the chapter we all just skim right to, because who doesn't want to do that? Yes, exactly, Marissa. It's learning the stories of different deities. Like, Madeline Miller's book is so good. And I note this in this book that it's supposed to be a mini series, her book, but she got long COVID and now it's been delayed. I don't know when, but it's something to keep in mind. There's this whole article that she writes about it. So coming back to the chapter 4, it's spell work and Circe, and that is, again, it's the fun one, right? We all want to talk about that. So I bring in a lot of quotes. Like, there's a lot from the book Library of History. And one of them is, Medea said to the Argonauts that she had brought with her many drugs of marvelous potency, which had been discovered by her mother Hecate. This is when they relate Circe with Hecate as her mom, and by her sister Circe. And though before this time she had never used them to destroy human beings, on this occasion she would be means of them easily wreak vengeance upon men who were deserving of punishment. I really bring this out in the book, this idea of enacting justice, enacting vengeance among different characters that I think, for me, when I was growing up, I was taught that that's not what girls do. And when they do, they're bad. But the more stories you read, the more you see this reclaiming of power. And while we could go into ethical debates about whether or not this is justified, one of the things that I hold to be super true is that, often in witchcraft, there is this, what you put out comes back to you threefold, or however it's phrased. I've forgotten it in this moment because I don't really work with that. I am very clear that witchcraft at its core has always been political and has always been about working against oppressors in some way, shape, or form. Read Aradia. And so enacting these different consequences for folks and their actions is right-sized. You might disagree, and I'm not telling anybody to go out and kill people who you don't like. But what I will say is that, the more you read these stories about folks who take action and that are acting in ways that are I think, reciprocal for what has happened, the more you recognize that society as a whole kind of teaches women, especially, and also marginalized groups, that we don't have a lot of power. And that's how you do it, is you by telling stories and saying like, oh, it's so wrong that they had a reaction to this. Oh my gosh, how could they ever do that? So I think that that's something to remember. And I talk about that a bit in the book, because I think that Circe, for a lot of reasons, is great, but also is someone who could help, who has helped me and might help others deconstruct their ideas about power and gender. And so I'm just going to leave it like that. But there's also, I pull out some other quotes from different writings, again, from the Library of History, about how Medea entered the palace of the king by night, having altered her appearance by means of drugs, and set fire to the building by applying to it a little root that had been discovered by her sister Circe, and had the property that when once it was kindled, it was hard to put out. Circe has a lot of knowledge. This is also what I really want to bring forward, is that she is wise. She knows things and understands things that other people don't. And that's part of why I think at some level, that's why she's sort of pushed off to this island by herself. And so for readers, thinking about how have your gifts or talents been minimized and sort of, maybe not actually, but metaphorically, sent away? How have you sent away your own talents and sent away your own wisdom because of a fear of it being powerful or someone telling you that it was too much? I think those are good questions that Circe can help you interact with. And in a time right now where I feel like that is something that is sort of in the air, this idea of whose wisdom do we value, whose talents and gifts do we value, I think that's something to think about. And I think that working with Circe is a good way to sort of deconstruct any of the oppressive, internalized oppression that you might have installed, because so many of us do. It is an ongoing practice of dismantling it. So there is a book called Mythology by Edith Hamilton. It is the first book I turn to usually when I'm working on books like this. It's old. It doesn't have tons of information in it, but it's sort of like the go-to for basic Greek mythology. And so Edith Hamilton in that book describes Circe as a most beautiful and most dangerous witch. And one of the things I keep saying in this book is about a sorceress. There's something about that word for me that strikes me as powerful and sort of stepping in to a title and a role of great importance. That having wisdom is part of it. Knowing how to use that information is bigger than that. Not, one of the things, so I'm an initiate in the reclaiming tradition, and we work with the Pearl Pentacle. And so you work with different points on the Pearl Pentacle. I won't talk about this for a long time, but two of the points are knowledge and wisdom. And one of the things when I teach that class is saying that it's one thing to have knowledge, but wisdom is knowing when to use it. I know there's the knowledge that I need to light this candle and let it burn for a while. Wisdom is knowing I shouldn't do it in a place where my cat can knock it over, or where I can catch fire with the curtains. So thinking about knowledge and wisdom is part of the spell work in Circe. And I also talk about how to work with her and herbs and things like that, what you might want to consider in terms of safety, in terms of what is intuitively something that inspires you. I don't understand Circe as someone who has a big recipe book, and nor do I do that in this book, because I really want to encourage folks to speak to and step into their own power when it comes to spell work. And that means trying a bunch of stuff out. If it works, great. And if it doesn't, okay, then you've learned something. That's how we've all learned stuff, is by making mistakes a lot of the time. Just me. So then chapter 5, I wanted to open up into necromancy and Circe. So uh, I think that there is a lot of glamorization, is that a word, of death and witchcraft and all of that. And it looks real sexy, I think, or like dangerous or, creepy or whatever. But there's sometimes not the work that backs that up in folks' magical practices. Not a judgment, but just an observation. And one of the things that I think is really important for my practice of witchcraft is to acknowledge the existence of death and the importance of that within all of our magical work as witches. So one of the things that I wrote a couple things in the book about this. First of all, that necromancy is not just about raising the dead. That's, if you want to see how that's practical magic is an interesting take on that. This is about journeying to the dead, right? This is calling to Circe or calling to Hecate and saying, hey, can you be this intermediary to connect me to the dead? Maybe a specific person who's died, maybe not. And so that you might communicate with them. So it is, to an extent, raising the dead for a minute, but not in the movie fashion. I'm gonna repeat a little bit of the book, and this might be from an earlier version because I have many versions of my book. Death is part of turning the wheel of the year. Death is always coming, and knowing this can help us live our lives more fully. I say this because I wonder if Circe reminds us of the magic and death and dying. I have often heard the advice that you cannot heal if you cannot hex. And while I'm not sure that's entirely true, what does ring true is that knowing how to heal means you should also know what is dangerous. Circe makes potions that will turn men into pigs, but these potions do not kill them. She could easily make concoctions to kill someone, and she doesn't make that choice. So again, knowledge, wisdom. I mean, to be fair, if somebody is coming up to your island or getting into your business, you want to leave them with a very strong impression that they shouldn't do that. But in order to relay that message to other folks who might be tempted to come into your space, you don't want them to be dead because they can't relay that message. All of this to say, there are a lot of practices in the book about working necromancy and adding that to your magical practice. Because, working with the dead is not just a Samhain thing. The dead are around all the time. The veil is not necessarily more thin, I don't think, at one point of the year than another. But working with this idea of the dead being close to us, being witnesses, maybe confidants, maybe guides, I think is important, just as it was in the story with Odysseus and Tiresias. I may not be saying that correctly, but sometimes the dead can help us go home. I did include one chapter in the book that is kind of different from things that I've done in the past, although I think now that I say that out loud, I think I did it for Artemis too. Circe's emergence in culture. So for folks who have read the Madeline Miller book at Circe, I do talk about that. I think it's important because I think that, things arrive in our culture for reasons. And I can't speak to Madeline Miller's, reasons for writing the book, but what I can say is that, or what I do say in the book is this. With the reversal of Roe versus Wade in the United States and the ongoing reduction of basic human rights for women in many countries and cities, the powerful Circe is undoubtedly a necessary figure. Not only does she fight back against men, which we might say patriarchy, but she also uses magic that can be taught to others. She is not one to suffer fools, and she recognizes when helping might be a good decision too. Circe and other goddesses can become not only figures of influence, but also beings to honor and worship. In that devotion, I have to believe we call up the spirits of cunning, discernment, and spell crafting. The more people we have focusing on these energies, the more effective the magic can be. I think that certain gods arrive when they're needed, and staying aware and attentive to these energies is an important practice as a human, not just a witch. It's sort of like, when you see like certain plants growing near each other because they complement each other, or they're helpful for something that often happens in that place. I think that that's the same thing with a lot of deities or a lot of stories. Madeline Miller wrote that book, many years ago, but now it's come up more and more. You see a lot of things actually with Greek mythology right now, the show Chaos, or you see a lot of shows with this idea of like the powerful woman who is sort of subverting cultural narratives, like thinking about Agatha all along. I think that things come up in media and culture and conversation and dreams because they're the things that we need to listen to in that moment, or things that could be helpful. Not always all the time, and maybe not very clearly, but I think that that's something that my devotional work has reminded me of. And then chapter 7 is also very different from anything I put in another book, but Circe is a different being, and she required, I think, just different things. And that was a whole chapter on, was Circe evil? I wanted to engage this question really directly. I think that as someone who works a lot with Greek gods and gods in general, I see a lot of narratives around this god is the worst. And to be clear, I have some that I feel that about. But, there's this sort of immediate judgment versus a willingness to get to know a person and willingness to get to know a deity. And in the world, I'm going to say that, and this is my opinion only, in a world where there are so many competing narratives, there are so many things that we could argue about that we are never going to see in the same way. I believe that there has to be a willingness to at least listen and try to learn where another person is coming from. You don't have to agree. I probably won't in some cases, but engaging these direct questions of like, is this evil or is it I don't understand? It could be both, but so that's why I brought this question up for Circe. Like, if I can place this onto a relationship with a god, maybe I can place this onto a relationship with other beings. This is what I write in that chapter. One thing to keep in mind is that energy is energy is energy. Another thing to consider is that stories are not necessarily about their content, and they can act as more of an allegory. What I offer is that Circe is also a symbol and an instigator. She offers the energy of alchemy, turning anger into action. This is an essential lesson in societies where oppressive structures exist and where activism can be unsustainable for some. I wonder more about how to look to Circe as being a wise teacher about gathering up energy to inform spell work. I think of her as also being someone who uses her energy, combined with her wisdom of herbs, to take on what is unjust, even if her version of unjust may not be the one you agree with. And also there's this ongoing description of Circe and a lot of gods as being like emotional or things like that. And I put, emotions are not bad by nature. They're simply pieces of energy that flow through us again and again. They are often heightened by the stories we tell and the people who are involved. Humans have emotions in a few categories: fear, happiness, sadness, disgust, anger, and surprise. These categories can spread out into more defined words and experiences, but let's stick with what's simple. Humans have emotions. In this emotional experience, we can decide to take action in a different direction. And then I go into my whole soapbox about people staying regulated. I think that that's something to remember in reading any story and also hearing stories about actions that you don't necessarily agree with, reactions you don't necessarily agree with. sitting with that and looking at it from the outside is important before labeling it something that could forever possibly skew your perspective. It doesn't mean that people who do shitty things get a pass, because that's not true for me. But I think that being willing to hear and listen before reacting is an important bit of all of this. Maybe Circe is not always the best example, but more often than not, she does sort of take a breath before really doing the thing that she could do. Good for her. Also, you know, sometimes I think that maybe we don't need to take such a big breath. Final chapter in all of my books usually is cultivating a relationship with that god. And Circe gets a chapter there too. I wanted to read one of the quotes that I have in there, and it's from Ovid's Metamorphose. To banish all doubt and distrust you may have in your power to attract, look into my eyes. I may be a goddess, the daughter born to the gleaming sun. The power of my spells and my herbs may be great, but I pray that I may be yours. Reject the one who rejects you. Respond to her who pursues you. Pretty sure that's referencing Glaucus or Odysseus. However, thinking about how to cultivate a relationship with a god does require some sort of surrender to the possibility that they're not going to live up to all of your expectations. I don't live up to all of my expectations. It does begin with recognizing that I might know all these stories and I might think all these things about this god right now. However, the more I get to know you, I might learn other things. I might change my mind. I might say, not the relationship for me. Or I might, just need to have the relationship look a different way. I think for Circe especially, and I think that she definitely is someone I've taken a lot of time with to create a relationship with her. I think that it's taken more questions and more sort of stepping back and thinking about what I think, etc. But the steps for creating a relationship with nearly any deity are about the same: learning about them, making time for them, making space for them, figuring out, how you're going to interact, figuring out what's sustainable, etc. There's a section actually early in the book that someone who's already read the book reached out to me and said that they really appreciated, and that was about how to fit a relationship with Circe and with working with other gods. So, and they said that they appreciated that was in there, so we'll look for that. But there's just mostly in this section a lot of questions. How do you sort of, how do you build a relationship with a deity if you haven't already? Or how do you build one with Circe especially? And I don't think a lot of the practices are very, I wrote a lot of practices for working with Circe because I don't think she's somebody that people necessarily have in their repertoire of gods if they're into a lot of gods. So I wanted to give as many thoughts, tips, tricks, so that you could get to know her and really work with her in very deep and diverse ways. And also I end that section with this whole dedication to Circe, if that's something that you would like to do. I'm a big fan of encouraging folks to make commitments to gods if they want to and on their own. You don't need to have anybody's permission. Definitely don't need a coven necessarily. You are your own being in relationship with a god. You can make that decision too. Now it does go into detail about how, maybe some best practices for that, because it's not, maybe I'm making it sound really simple, and it can be. And also, is a relationship with any being simple? Should it be? I don't think so. And at the end, as I usually do at the end of a book launch, I usually read the last invocation, devocation of the god. Circe, I call to you. Circe, I call to your power. Circe, I call to your wisdom. I call to the way of transmutation that shifts what needs to be changed. I call to the way of illusion that hides what needs to be hidden. I call to the way of necromancy that connects me to the wisdom of the dead. I ask you to help me take my anger to fuel my magic. I ask you to help me in seeing the best action. I ask you to help me know the next step. With your wisdom of herbs and potions, I call myself into the spell. With your knowledge of animals, I call myself into the spell. With your trust in yourself, I call myself into the spell. May your sorcery inspire me. May your magic fuel me. May your power remind me that I too can be dangerous. Circe, you are rightfully feared. Circe, you are rightfully blessed. Circe, you are welcome into my life. I think Circe is very well timed in this moment. And to be clear, I have no idea when my books come out, when they're going to be coming out. Even this one I didn't know. But again, like I said towards the beginning, I think that gods arrive when they're most needed, and that their stories and their images become louder when they're most needed. And I don't claim to be the person who is putting Circe up on a pedestal. She's been there for a while, but she is also someone who's come up in other books. So there's this other book that I contributed to, Serpents of Circe, through Revelor Press, not Moon Books. And so many rituals and stories and a whole bunch of a diverse set of things by a whole bunch of people. Mine pieces dedicating to the dreadful Circe. It's a combination of pieces. And this also arrived right as I was finishing the other book, the opportunity to submit to this. So Circe is up right now, and this particular book is Serpents of Circe, a Manual to Magical Resilience. I don't like saying like we are in unprecedented times. I think that we are in the times that we are in. I think that it feels really loud and it feels really big because we are inundated with news and information all the time. I think that were this any other time, we wouldn't know everything that we know all the time right now. But this is a time that we, I think humans are built for. We are in this time, I think, because we were born to be in this time. And for me, working with gods and working with magic and remembering that witchcraft is inherently political and is inherently something that was used to combat oppressive structures and rulers, that's something important to remember. That no matter what your magic looks like, no matter what your spells look like, no matter how you show up, the fact that you do show up is an important thing. And Circe is a good example of how showing up makes a difference and has an impact. So that's what I have to say about the book. There's plenty more in there. I really glazed over things, but I am so excited to be able to share it with you. And it is available on all the bookseller places, on my website also. And Serpents of Circe is not available on my website yet, but I did order some and it's on its way. I do have books. I have Circe books on my website, but also Amazon is great. I mean, it's not great, but it's a place to buy stuff and get it quickly and stuff. So it all comes to this. Yeah, so I think that I don't think there's anything else I want to say about the book, but I am open to if there are any questions, comments, concerns, I guess. And if you don't have any right now, totally fine. You can always leave them in the comment section when I post this, or you might just send me a message if you want to chat about a god. I think that Circe, for me, at least in this moment, is inspirational and a bit aspirational. I know for myself, I need to constantly remind myself, yeah, Marissa, I'm looking forward to you reading it too. I think it's each book of mine gets a little bit more emboldened and activisty, so I hope it's inspirational. But yeah, I just think that this is a time where working with these gods and working with these practices not only fuels me as a human, but also fuels and impacts the world. Because even if the one thing that I do doesn't change everything overnight, little things over time do. And at least that's what I have to believe. I'm very hope core, I think. I think that's what I would say. I'm very hope core because this world has gone through things of huge importance that we didn't think we would get through, and we did. I'm not trying to downplay the harm that is going to happen in the coming years, the challenges and, I don't know, the right conditions perhaps for a lot of Circe-like action, I would imagine. Directly interacting with what's to come, I think, is one of the key lessons. Also recognizing that being angry, being sad, being scared are all energy. And that energy can be directed to what you can do from the place that you are, from the person that you are. Because we're not all, activism can look a whole bunch of different ways. Part of my activism is writing these books and talking to folks like you about these gods and their willingness to be complicated and messy, but also really impactful. Just like humans, just like you. So I hope that it does inspire. I'd love to hear what you think of the book when you get it. I'd love to hear, if you have any questions. Obviously, I can't cover every single thing that's about Circe in the world, but I definitely wanted to create a foundation that would be inspiring, because I don't know about you, I like a good inspirational shove, nudge in this world. So yeah, and I think probably in the coming year, I'll probably have a class on this book too. I think I'm going to do classes on all my books this year. And because you're here, I'm going to also let you in on a little thing that I'm working on right now. I just finished the first draft of my book on Hecate. So Circe is in it because I lean a little bit more heavily into those two being related in that book. So I'm very excited about that. That won't come out forever, but it is on its way. And I'm often curious about what's going to be happening in the world when that deity pops out in this book. But yeah, so thank you. Thank you for your time, your attention, and you could be doing so many other things right now besides listening to me. But you're here either in this moment or later on, and I thank you for it. And if you have any other questions for me or have any other suggestions for other books that you might want to see, please reach out. I'm open. I only have one other book planned after Hecate, and then I might take a little break, but I'll get right back at it because there are other deities to chat about, other deities that I have thoughts about. But yeah, so I guess I'll just give a little spiel for myself. My website, irisanyamoon.com, is being rebuilt right now, so it's going to look really different soon. But it has everything that you might want to know about me and my work. Also, I have a Substack called Heart Magic. It's irisanya.substack.com, and I share something there at least every Monday for everybody, and then paid subscribers get a couple extra things. But yeah, thank you so much. Unless there's any other questions, I'll hang for another minute. I'm sure that I could come up with something else to say, maybe. Yeah, Serpents of Circe is also on Amazon, but it's also on Revelor Press's site, look through my social media to find that. There's every time, even when I buy it, money goes to a couple of really amazing organizations. So it helps a lot of folks. Great. Again, thank you so much for your time. I will catch you the next time. My next book that's coming out is in the spring, and that is Hestia, goddess of hearth, home, and community. I think that's the title. I don't know. I can't remember right now. I don't have it in front of me. All right. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, night, year, and everything. And many blessings on your magic.